Hello, Jessica Frost-Ballas here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm doing a video collaboration with a crafty friend of mine, and I'm sharing some of my favorite tips and tricks for working with die cuts. Later, I'll share a link to her video where she's putting her own spin on one of my favorite techniques. I'm using the Layered Books, Shelves, and Shelves Edition standalone dies from Waffle, along with the A Little Help stamp set. So let's get started. Over the years, die cuts have really become more and more of a standalone product versus just a coordinating product for stamp sets. I really love working with them and using different mediums to bring those dies to life. But they have their own quirks, and I've come up with a couple tips and tricks over the years to make them a little easier for me to use. First off, whenever I die cut something, there are always tiny little shavings of paper still stuck to the die cut cardstock. Different dies cut differently, and my cutting plates are sometimes more worn in some spots, so it makes sense, but I hate seeing those little shavings on my final card. Especially when it's like little bits of white cardstock pieces that really stand out sharply against a black cardstock background. So I needed a way to clean them up before I used them. I use a variety of little tools to help clean up my dies before I use them on a card. I use a regular old cheap emery board first to take off any loose bits. I'm working over a piece of black cardstock so you can actually see how much I get off those die cut pieces. I run the emery board over the back of my die cut to loosen any little bits of cardstock. Then I take a metal nail file, also a cheap drugstore find, and use them to go around any detail areas where I can see pieces of cardstock stuck to the die cut piece. Finally, I take a little low-tack tape and run it over the die cut piece. This usually removes any little bits that are still clinging on. Just look at how much came off those 3 tiny die cuts. I'm going to speed up the process now, but I repeat it until all of my die cut pieces are nice and clean. One of the things I admire most about my crafty friend Ardith is her use of die cuts. So in today's collaboration, we decided to combine our 2 favorite things, ink blending and die cuts, and use them both on our projects. I'm sharing some of my favorite tips and tricks on her favorite technique, and she's sharing her favorite tips and tricks on mine. Make sure you check out her video linked below for a different spin on ink blending. Next, I tape one of the rectangle stencil masks from Honeybee Stamps onto a panel of distress heavy stock cardstock. I've always been a huge fan of Strathmore Bristol Smooth for my ink blending, but I've recently decided that I kinda like the look of the heavy stock more when I'm using blending brushes. Also, just a quick heads up that the stencil I'm using is retiring, so it's on clearance over at Honeybee Stamps. I'll link it above, and I highly recommend it. I'm ink blending a soft rainbow, so to make sure I get an even coverage of my colors, I start with my middle shade, Cracked Pistachio, and blend it on a diagonal over the stencil. Then I blend down using Salvage Patina, Tumbled Glass, and Shaded Lilac. Above, I use Squeezed Lemonade, Dried Marigold, and Spun Sugar. I go back and forth between the colors with my blending brushes until I have a smooth blend. Occasionally, I look at it from different angles to make sure the blending is smooth. I have a video linked above that shows my blending tips and tricks. You can also check out my friend Ardith's video today where she's showing how she does her ink blending. There's a link in the YouTube description below. Next, I used a variety of blending brushes to color my die cut pieces with Distress Oxide inks. You can find different size blending brushes over at Hero Arts or those cute bitty blenders of the rabbit hole designs. Depending on what I'm blending, I'll use a variety of sizes of blending brushes. If you've watched my main ink blending tips and tricks video, you'll notice that I'm using a lot of new supplies that I haven't really used before. I promise I have an updated blending video coming soon with some new resources and tips. Once I'm finished, I set those pieces aside to dry completely while I work on the rest of my card. I do a little Copic coloring on the plant pots and book pages so I can get a little more subtle blending. Then I stamp the 2 cats from A Little Help and color them with Copic markers as well. I use warm grays for the cats and the same E shades for the book pages. Once I'm done, I die cut them with the coordinating dies. I also stamp a sentiment from Story Sentiments onto black cardstock and heat emboss it with white embossing powder before trimming it down to a thin label. Then it's just assembly time. I use a mix of regular adhesive and liquid glue to put all the shelf elements in place, and then I use foam mounting tape for the cats and sentiment to give them a little more dimension. Off camera, I add accents with a white gel pen and a little shimmer to the books and flowers with a Spectrum Noir glitter brush. And my final tip for working with die cuts is when you have tiny areas that need a little glue, like the tips of these plant leaves, I like to add a little glue onto a piece of scrap paper and then carefully slide it under the cardstock and gently tap it to the back. That way you get just enough glue on the cardstock to hold it in place without having glue oozing out everywhere. And that's it! You can find more information on the products I used in the YouTube description below or over on my blog. Be sure to check out Artist's video for her take on my favorite technique of ink blending. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel. If you do subscribe, make sure you click the bell so you're notified the next time I post. Here are a few more videos you might be interested in, and until next time, have an amazing day and happy crafting. Bye!